The museum is unbelievable. This is a view from inside the dry dock, showing all the connections from across from one side to the other. And they built the museum by literally gouging out the area around an existing dry dock. The entrance to the dry dock was there, and they maintained the walls, the dry dock, carved all this area out, and the museum itself rests in this area through here. It's an amazing use of an existing facility. There's it under construction there. And this is, it took about 3 or 4 years to build, obviously. The displays inside are all out in that area outside the dry dock. And you can, I say, you can take ramps and connections from one side to the other. And the museum is exceptionally well laid out and fairly extensive. But in actual fact, the museum itself overpowers the exhibits. Because the museum itself is so impressive, you tend to sort of look at the exhibits as sort of, well, they're there as well, but let's look at the dry dock. So we walked through this museum, and it's worth, if you're ever in that part of Denmark, it's certainly worth visiting. The other thing I liked about this museum is it had a lot of ship models. And the models that it had of ships that had sunk, it showed them going to the bottom. Which I thought was a very, very interesting way to depict a ship that had been lost at sea. And during the Second World War, they lost, First World War and Second World War, they lost a lot of ships through torpedo action. And so they had a lot of ships in this vertical position in the displays, which I thought was very clever. Oops. And the last museum we went to see was the Viking Museum at, what was the name of the town? Roskilde, exactly, exactly. And this, again, from the point of view of looking at what museums offer that can be of benefit to the Marine Museum of the Great Lakes. This was the most active museum we were at. It was dynamic. They were actually building a replica of a Viking ship. And I should say the museum, the basis of the museum is 5 Viking ships they had recovered in the 1950s. These ships had been sunk to block an entrance to a canal. And so there are a variety of different ships. There are long ships, there are cargo ships, ships of different sizes. So it was an exceptional find. And they brought these ships to the surface. And the same technology that they used to preserve the Vassar, they preserved these ships. Whole, what's the name of the stuff? PPG, polyethylene glycol system. And then they took the plans from these ships and built replicas. And this is a replica of the longship they discovered. And by examining the wood characteristics of the original, they determined the ship had actually been built in Ireland. So they sailed the replica to Ireland with a full crew.
Is that something modern on?
Yeah, that's radar. They needed that.
But it's made of wood.
Yeah. And while we were there, they were splitting a 4-foot diameter log, 40 feet long, by hand in the same methods that they used the Vikings used. And we got there about 3, because we were at the Danish Museum in the morning, we got here in the afternoon.
They were halfway down that long.
Yeah, the log had been pretty well split, and they're still driving wedges in it, trying to split the log. And all these boats here are replicas of the ships they discovered in the, that they preserved from the sunken ships. They figure they're sunk in around the year 1000, year 1100. And here they are hammering away wedges with this log. And then right next to it, of course, the lumber they get from this log. They have the log, they quarter the log, they cut it in 8ths, then they cut it in 16ths, and then they hew planks out of those 16ths. So the grain on those planks runs the full length of the plank. And that's why the Viking ships were so strong and so limber, because the grain structure was continual. And they were building this replica.
So they're building with wet green lumber?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that makes it easy to,
That's a good question. I assume they're building with green lumber because they're splitting. Maybe they let it dry for a while, I don't know.
Well,
easier to split
hadn't
when
that
it's dry.
log just been delivered from somewhere?
That log had just arrived the day before,
Just,
yeah.
yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean it's green.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's sitting for a while. Well, except that it's easier to split green with than dry wood, because the other way around. Other way around. I must admit, they got to the point where they looked at the watches and said, it's getting pretty close to 5 o'clock. And so they got some mechanical
Yeah.
stuff to split the logs.
And each guy would get up on top of the log and be whacking away. They'd only last for 3 or 4 minutes. And then somebody else did it.
Yeah.
They took turns.
But when it did come apart, there was
A
quite
cheer. I took a video.
So this is the museum part of the exhibit. Most of the grounds is outdoors with all sorts of things going on. And then you get into the building itself, and it's getting close to 5 at this time. And these are the ships they actually recovered and have them sitting in these metal frames that duplicate the shape they think the ship was. And I say there are longboats, cargo vessels, all different types, all dating from about 1100. You know, this is the level of preservation. All of this preserved with PEG, same as the Mazza. And in the shop adjacent to where they're building the ships outdoors, they're building these indoors as well. And then not only do they build these, they sell them. So, you know, if you time it right and you make a reservation beforehand, you can actually go for a sail in these vessels. So, you know, I'm not sure if this is because this was the last museum we saw, but certainly because it was the most active museum we saw and had the greatest amount of community involvement. It was certainly, I think, established in me anyway that the secret to any marine museum is having things actively going on that you can interrelate with, talk to people, and become directly involved in.
Is that Noel at the helm?
He'll have to answer that question.
Geez, I don't remember, I don't think so.
So that's the end of the presentation on marine museums of Scandinavia, and specifically the search for Frederik Henrick Chapman. Glad to answer any questions.
Are you familiar with the small museum up in Glen Williams where they have a group of volunteers building boats with kids on Saturdays?
No, glad to know you were.
In Ontario.
No, but actually we're meeting with John Summers actually in the Marine Museum, and we're going to discuss things like that make museums more community oriented.
Because the activity, I think, is what makes it too.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it would be fantastic.
Well, we got a whole list of museums we'd like to see. The museums are great places, actually. The American Museum makes complete others.
Rob, we've been in the past sponsoring and contributing to the Marine Museum up in the Great Lakes. What is the disposition of the situation now vis-a-vis right at this time? Is it in existence?
It is in existence. As you know, the museum was asked to leave its previous property because the federal government sold it to a contractor. The contractor said, get off my land, basically, give us took advantage of 120 days provision of the lease. We had 120 days to get off the property, which was a bit of a rush. We actually talked to the city of Hamilton about moving the museum to the city of Hamilton. And the city of Kingston found out we were talking to Hamilton, and they stepped forward and provided storage space for the museum. The museum is actually in storage at Portsmouth Olympic Harbor, and the city provided a storefront facility there as well. So the museum exists in a storefront facility with more significant models on display. We're now in negotiations with, no, I wouldn't call it negotiations, we're in discussions with the city about finding a new site for the museum. As I say, as soon as they heard that Hamilton might be interested, something that had little value initially to them became great value to them. So we're working well with the city.
They could have had the land for $1.
Well, the city could have bought that land for $1 and opted not to. And the federal government ended up selling it to this contractor for $3 million. So the city, I thought, just
They blew it.
they blew it.
When,
Just get back to you. So the museum is active. I'm going to a board meeting this month. We've got John Summers involved talking to us. We've got a bunch of consultants. We're now in the enviable position of being able to decide what we want to be and how we want to display it. We're not tied to any existing buildings or anything else. We can be whatever we want. So now our challenge is to figure out exactly what that is.
are you tied to existing artifacts?
Yes. We have the complete collection we had before. We can decide what we want to do with them, what we want to maintain and what we don't. We look at upon ourselves as a curatorial museum. So we want to keep the ship's plans, want to keep as much as we can, and establish an archive and a display area, and be interactive. And from Kingston's point of view, also become a museum of Kingston as well, because Kingston itself doesn't have a museum. And of course, tying in indigenous history and Lake Ontario ecology and shipwrecks and everything into all that. So the biggest challenge is exactly that, trying to figure out where we're going to be.
Bob, is it fair enough to say that we could consider that in our assessment this year?
Oh, absolutely.
Contribution?
Yeah. George actually in his will, George Cutler, was very generous donation to the
George Cuthbert.
Yeah. And so all the CNC drawings were took.
Yeah, George was involved with the Marine Museum.
He used to be on the board of directors, and all his drawings, he donated all his drawings. So the museum, from our point of view, Shellbacks is still a very active museum, somewhat in transition, shall I say. Anyway.
But you'd welcome a donation.
Yes. we have a full-time manager, we have staff, they're hiring a program director. Not as a program director. So they're organizing programs with the local public schools. So.
Great. Good. Jim.
When Chapman made the first molds of the bow, what was the building material they were using then?
Wood. They have a wooden female mold, basically. Wood.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, and then they'd shape the planks for the bow in that mold.
Would they still steam the planks then?
Yeah, they haven't developed composite construction yet, but it's still with construction yet. Yeah. But the key was that he made sure all that stuff was done before the ship started construction. While one ship, as saw the models of those ships, they framed them, planked them basically up to the waterline, launched them, then finished them in the water. Then once that one was launched, they started the next one. And by building them identical, all the 10 ship of the line were identical. They could utilize all the same materials. They say the building 20 ships in 3 years was unheard of back then. I mean, Mazza itself took like 2 years to build just the one ship.
When did fiberglass start?
When did it start?
I mean, in boat building.
Well, the Swedish Navy started in the 1990s, I guess. But boat building had started just after the Second World War.
19 what?
The Visby class corvette, which was the first completely composite warship built. I was there in 2004, and I was there in 2004, and they'd launched at least 2 of them by then. And then the U.S. Navy built the DDG 1000, which has a steel hull but a complete balsa cord carbon fiber superstructure, and that was built while I was at Baltic in the early 2000s. That was a $26 billion ship,
Do you have any idea how well the two naval forces of Sweden got along with each other? Like
They didn't talk to each other. The Navy resented the fact that the Army ran the inshore fleet, and there's a lot of friction between the two.
What's the situation today?
I think it all comes under the, well, that's a good question. I assume it all comes under the same
Armed forces?
armed forces, yeah, I don't know. But you're right, the Navy did not appreciate the Army having control of the inshore fleet.
Terry?
Yeah, just looking at the shot there, it looks as though they're going to weather with a square sail.
Yeah.
Have you any comment on that?
Yeah, that's the way the Viking ships did that. They still had a square yard, and they just swung it around. And this is basically the early development of the lug rig. The lug was basically just make the yard asymmetrical, maybe angle it a bit, and still tack the tack of the sail to the bow. So
Was that traditional?
Yeah, I think it's well traditional, depending on what time period. The whole rig evolved through time. But anything that's being done in this museum, you could be sure was the traditional way it was done. That 50-foot longboat, they kept emphasizing how flexible those boats were. And our tour guide would actually got on the stern of the boat and started rocking it back and forth. And you could see the whole ship doing this.
Philip, last comment and question, and if anybody else wants to ask them.
Now, this boat was about designed in about 1000. Is it? They're using a rudder. They don't have the steering.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. This may be one of the ones they built in the shop inside, which is probably a more modern type vessel. But you're right about that, because the evolution of the rudder, actually, you can look at the boats in that museum, and they're all basically steered by the steering oar. Yeah, some of them have stern rudders, and actually in that museum they have some 19th century vessels as well, which have stern rudders. But you have a sharp eye.
Thank you, Rob. Again, you just demonstrate what a font of information you are and how well you present. I think the Marine Museum in Kingston is very lucky to have you on board, and I look forward to some of those activities that will be part of that museum. And once again, a little thank you token from us for your time and your effort. We certainly appreciate it. Please give Rob another big round of applause. Yes,
Thank you for coming to these. Rob, just what's happening with the Marine Museum in Toronto?
It doesn't exist.
Anything?
No. Everything that was in the Marine Museum in Toronto is now in the archives of the City of Toronto. What's that? The road here. Well, it's down Libby's Village.
It's down on Atlantic Avenue.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to come and talk to him afterwards, please. Can I just finish up here for a second? Next week, we do have John Summers joining us, and he's going to be talking about canoes and romance from the late 19th century to the present day. Women and canoes, men and canoes, canoes with sails, without sails, designing and building canoes. John has covered the gamut with respect to canoes. And the following week, we'll have Fran and Stephen Hill. I don't know if you remember, they were here for our last session last year, and they did part one of their trip on their 37 Nordic tug. And so this past summer, they continued their earlier trip, and they headed further down the eastern seaboard to New York City, up the Hudson to Lake Champlain, north to the St. Lawrence, up the Ottawa, down the Rideau, and finally back to the Trent Severn and home. So with that, pipes out.